It is Monday, October 3rd, 2018. It is 8 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, and so you know what time it is. It's time for a little bit of coin metal. And it was a very, very good, a very well-balanced, get your ass kicked out Jiu-Jitsu Wednesday. We covered a little bit of single leg takedown, which I gotta say, man, I really like single leg takedowns. If I can manage them, I really do enjoy them. But yeah, it's one of those moves that I don't think I spend enough time doing, you know. And we've been doing a little bit more in the takedown stuff, and I'll tell you what, my legs are paying for it, man. It's one of those things of, you know, either somebody landing on your leg or you know, not tripping you fully when they try and sweep your leg, or something to that effect, where your legs get all fucked up from doing stand-up stuff. But it's got to be done, because, you know, before you get to the ground, you're going to be standing. So you got to be able to take the guy down. You know, you got to be able to get them in a position to be able to utilize all the wonderful jiu-jitsu skills that you've been picking up. And so yeah, we did a little bit of sparring, and I don't know, I think I was having a little bit of difficulty listening to the instructor with regard to what the sparring was to consist of, because we were starting off like, you know, you had the person in a single leg, and like you're trying to take them down from there. You know, it's a pretty fucked position to be in, really. But I was able to maintain my balance pretty well. I think I only gotten taken down once. And I found that that one of the things that it seems like is really effective with regard to opening up the space and trying to reacquire your leg from your opponent is to get a like an overhook going between their head and their shoulder. You know, the shoulder that's like against you. If you can like dig that one down and yank your leg back at the same time, that's kind of a good way to disengage that old leg from your opponent. And I don't know, I enjoy doing the stand-up stuff, because like I said, the fight's going to start standing, most likely going to start standing, and we'll probably go to the ground from there. But, you know, the duration that you're actually standing, you're going to have to deal with a standing opponent, not a laying down opponent. So, got to be able to take them down. But yeah, I am. Like I said, between the single leg and the double leg, I think I prefer the single leg, because I'm whether or not I can actually fight this way is one thing, but I like foot positions. I like paying attention to the foot position, and it's only been like the last few years that I've seen more fighters employing both of their feet as a lead. You know, and being able to swap back and forth from conventional to southpaw, and do so fluidly, you know, and as part of their offense or part of their defense. And I think it's very, very important in the context that it's not something that I think is paid as much attention to, but your foot position is everything. I mean, especially when you're trying to take somebody down. You know, the direction that you want them to go, the way that you want them to go down, that it's all contingent on where you put your feet. You know, if you don't put your feet in the right place, you're not going to be able to pull your opponent down, or at least not the way you're intending to. And so, like I said, I've been trying to pay attention more to doing that, being able to swap out leads. You know, because like with some takedowns, you want to take one of your legs and swing it back to make room for your opponent to fall in, or to give yourself momentum to take your opponent down. And so, like I said, you know, I try to keep in mind my leads. You know, and I got the impression today that a lot of people weren't paying attention to the aspect of where they had their feet positioned in what type of takedown they're trying to do. And I was talking to one of the people that I was working with today, and he kept swapping his leads to be opposite me. So, you know, if I had my left lead forward, he put his left lead forward, you know, too. And I'm like, no, we're trying to do single legs. So, you know, if you have your left foot forward, I'm going to bring my right foot forward. Don't match me. You know, so I can get a hold of that leg, you know, because that's the leg that I want to get. And he thought about it for a moment, and he was like, oh, okay, that makes sense. It's that, you know, you don't really think about, or he wasn't really thinking about what the importance was for his leg position or his foot position in what he was trying to do. And like I said, I think that's something that not enough people pay attention to. You have to know where your feet are, man. You have to know where your feet are. You have to know where your opponent's feet are. You know, if you're trying to keep your opponent off balance, like, you know, he's putting up that right jab, and he's hoping to get you with like a left or something like that, right? And he's got his right foot forward. If you swap your leads, right? If you bring your left foot forward, he's not gonna be able to bridge the gap with that jab, right? But it's gonna keep his foot right there for you to do like leg kicks on, or single leg takedown, or if you swap your leads around again, you could come in for a good double leg takedown too. And so, you know, it's one of those things where I'm trying to be more fluid with that, you know. And even psyching out my opponent. Like when we were playing tag, one of the things that I was doing was I would feint like I was gonna right lead, right? And as soon as the person that I was going towards started to move off to my right, instead of leading in with my right, I would drop it back and swap over to that left. And I mean, I'm like halfway there to them already, you know? And so, like I said, the foot position and all that, it's terribly important, you know, especially with regard to takedowns, because it can be the difference between a takedown or a failed takedown, really. Anyway, let's go ahead and throw down into some music, and I just got a new one for me in the mail today, and we'll see if it actually included it in the list here, which is probably not likely. No. Damn it, Jim. Let's try this one. Aha! There we go. And so, yeah, this album, this is another one of those that I found through Headbangers Ball. And those of you who are familiar with that show, there was a show on MTV back when MTV actually played music videos all day. And it went through several different iterations. Like the first time they tried to do it, they had Bruce Dickinson, the lead singer for Iron Maiden, on it. And they didn't have a set host. And so they were having musicians hosting it. And then they had this girl doing it, and then a guy, and then Ricky Rackman, like, I don't know, like, I want to say like 2 or 3 years into it. And Ricky Rackman kind of carried it for a while. And there were just a few bands that, you know, I'd never heard of on a radio show or anything like that I picked up from there. And one of them was Testament. And Testament was kind of weird because they were touring a lot in my area. I mean, enough that I was seeing their posters fucking plastered everywhere. But I never heard any of their stuff on the radio because none of the stations around me played metal, or at least none of the ones I knew. And so yeah, I was watching Headbangers Ball, and I think this album was released when they were just doing it a half an hour during the daytime, and it was like 11:30 or 11:30 to 12, or, you know, 11 to 11:30, or one of those two. Anyway, so here it is. This is Testament. And as far as which album or which song to play, we're actually dealing with this one now. So here it is. Greenhouse Effect, Testament. First Dance here on Coin Metal. And that was 12 Foot Ninja with Coming For You. Man, I like that song. Anywho, as far as what we're going to cover today, leave it to the trusty Twitter feed to give us the good stuff. And I went through a little bit ahead of time and did just a teeny tiny a bit of planning here, and I know that's unusual for this show, but I got to do it at least once, right? Anyway, I've got this article here in front of me here, and we're going to start off by prefacing this with a couple of Vitalik Buterin's notes. And this is on Vitalik.ca. And the reason we are going to go about it this way is I have never felt that electing governors to represent you in cryptocurrencies was intelligent at all. The whole point of cryptocurrencies is that you don't have to trust anybody, right? So why the hell are you going to trust a bunch of people to represent you when they're talking about code modifications for the money you use? See, I think letting the miners decide what they want to run on their machines is probably the best way to go about it. But that's just me. Anyway, so let's find out what Vitalik has to say about it, because I have not prefaced this by actually covering the material first, only just knowing that this is in reference to what we're going to be talking about slightly later on. So, a little bit of backing. Notes on blockchain governance, and this is by Vitalik Buterin, so of course, yes, penis, I think. I'm not sure he's from here, meaning this planet. That's my only doubt there. I'm sure he's male, whatever species he may actually be, but yeah. Anyway, continuing. And this was authored on December 17th, 2017, in which I argue that highly coupled on-chain voting is overrated. The status quo of, quote, informal governance as practiced by Bitcoin, Bitcoin Cash, Ethereum, Zcash, and other similar systems is much less bad than commonly thought. That people who think that the purpose of blockchains is to completely expunge soft, mushy human institutions and feelings in favor of completely algorithmic governance, emphasis on completely, are absolutely crazy. And loosely coupled voting as done by carbon votes and similar systems is underrated, as well as describe what framework should be used when thinking about blockchain governance in the first place. And that was a preface to the preface here. One of the more interesting recent trends in blockchain governance is the resurgence of on-chain coin holder voting as a multi-purpose decision mechanism. Votes by coin holders are sometimes used in order to decide who operates the supernodes that run the network, ergo DPoS, EOS, and NEO, Lisk, and other systems. Sometimes to vote on protocol parameters, ergo the Ethereum gas limit, and sometimes to vote on directly implemented protocol upgrades, wholesale, ergo Tezos. In all of these cases, the votes are automatic. The protocol itself contains all of the logic needed to change the validator set or to update its own rules, and does this automatically in response to the result of votes. Explicit on-chain governance is typically touted as having several major advantages. First, unlike the highly conservative philosophy espoused by Bitcoin, it can evolve rapidly and accept needed technical improvements. Second, by creating an explicit decentralized framework, it avoids the perceived pitfalls of informal governance, which is viewed to be either too unstable or prone to chain splits, or prone to becoming too de facto centralized. The latter being the same argument made in the famous 1972 essay, Tyranny of Structurelessness. And just on a side note on that one, Core seems to be experiencing that right now, and unfortunately, there's a lot of people out there that are characterizing it as like 87% of the network is useless or something like that. No. 87% of the network says, fuck you, I'm not going to upgrade my fucking software to this patch or whatever the fuck that you've put out. Now, whether or not that means that they are explicitly for somebody exploiting the bug or not, I don't think that's true either. I think that the variety of implementations that are contained within that 85%, probably a great number of them do not have the bug to begin with. You know, you're probably talking about maybe 20, maybe 30% of the people that are still running older versions of the software that are even going to be affected by the bug. And so this whole pressure to just hurry up and upgrade, fuck you. Who the fuck are you to tell me what software to run on my hardware? You're nobody. You're a dev. Write some fucking code. If I want to run it on my machine, I'll run it on my fucking machine. Got it? Capiche? Continuing on. Quoting from Tezos documentation, while all blockchains offer financial incentives for maintaining consensus on their ledgers, no blockchain has a robust on-chain mechanism that seamlessly amends the rules governing its protocol and rewards protocol development. As a result, first-generation blockchains empower de facto centralized core development teams or miners to formulate design choices. And as I just noted, that's not actually taking place on the Bitcoin network right now. There's probably some pressure on there to change, but there's a lot of people just putting up their middle finger, and kind of scratching their head and saying, yeah, whatever. Continuing on. And yes, but why would you want to make a minority chain split easier? Splits destroy network effects. On-chain governance used to select validators also has the benefit that it allows for networks that impose high computational performance requirements on validators without introducing economic centralization risks and other traps of the kind that appear in public blockchains, ergo the validator's dilemma. So far, all in all, on-chain governance seems like a very good bargain. So what's wrong with it? What is blockchain governance? To start off, we need to describe more clearly what the process of, quote, blockchain governance is. Generally speaking, there are two informal models of governance that I will call the, quote, decision function view of governance and the coordination view of governance. The decision function views, the decision function view treats governance as a function. Let's see, f, x1, x2, zn, continuing on, or xn, where the inputs are the wishes of various legitimate stakeholders, senators, the president, property owners, shareholders, voters, etc., and the output is the decision. The decision function view is often useful as an approximation, but it clearly frays very easily around the edges. People often can and do break the law and get away with it. Sometimes rules are ambiguous and sometimes revolutions happen. And all three of these possibilities are at least sometimes a good thing. And often, even behavior inside the system is shaped by incentives created by the possibility of acting outside of the system. And this, again, is at least sometimes a good thing. The coordination model of governance, in contrast, sees governance as something that exists in layers. The bottom layer is, in the real world, the laws of physics themselves. As a geopolitical realist would say, guns and bombs. And in the blockchain space, we can abstract a bit further and say that it is each individual's ability to run whatever software they want in their capacity as a user, miner, stakeholder, validator, or whatever other kind of agent a blockchain protocol allows them to be. The bottom layer is always the ultimate decider. If, for example, all Bitcoin users wake up one day and decide to edit their client's source code and replace the entire code with an Ethereum client that listens to the balances of a particular ERC token contract, then that means that ERC20 token is Bitcoin. The bottom layer's ultimate governing power cannot be stopped, but The actions that people take on this layer can be influenced by the layers above it. The second and critically important layer is coordination institutions. The purpose of a coordination institution is to create focal points about how and when individuals should act in order to better coordinate behavior. There are many situations, both in blockchain governance and in real life, where if you act in a certain way alone, you are likely to get nowhere, or worse. But if everyone acts together, a desired result can be achieved. And that gives us a little diagram here, and we're not going to read it. In these cases, it's in your interest to go if everyone else is going, and stop if everyone else is stopping. You can think of coordination institutions as putting up green or red flags in the air, saying go or stop, with an established culture that everyone watches these flags and usually does what they say. Why do people have the incentive to follow these flags? Because everyone else is already following these flags. And if you have the incentive to do the same thing as what everyone else is doing, let's see. Yeah, whatever. I don't think that's correct. Strong claim. This concept of coordination flags encompasses all that we mean by governance in scenarios where coordination games, or more generally, multi-equilibrium games, do not exist. The concept of governance is meaningless. In the real world, military orders from a general function as a flag, and in the blockchain world, the simplest example of such a flag is the mechanism that tells people whether or not a hard fork, quote, is happening. Coordination institutions can be very formal, or they can be informal, and often give suggestions that are ambiguous. Flags that would ideally be either red or green, but sometimes a flag might be yellow, or even holographic, appearing green to some participants and yellow or red to others. Sometimes there are multiple flags that conflict with one another. The key questions of governance thus becomes number one, what should layer 1 be? That is, what features should be set up in the initial protocol itself, and how does this influence the ability to make formulaic, i.e. decision function like protocol changes, as well as the level of power of different kinds of agents to act in different ways. Number 2, what should layer 2 be? That is, what coordination institutions should people be encouraged to care about? None. That's just my opinion. The role of coin voting. Ethereum also has a history with coin voting, including DAO proposal votes, the DAO carbon vote, the EIP 186, 649, 669 carbon vote. Continuing on. These three are all examples of loosely coupled coin voting, or coin voting as a layer 2 coordination institution. Ethereum does not have any examples of tightly coupled coin voting, or coin voting as a layer 1 in-protocol feature, though it does have an example of tightly coupled miner voting. Miners' right to vote on the gas limit. Clearly, tightly coupled voting and loosely coupled voting are competitors in the governance mechanism space. So it's worth dissecting what are the advantages and disadvantages of each one. Assuming zero transaction costs, and if used as a sole governance mechanism, the two are clearly equivalent. If a loosely coupled vote says that change X should be implemented, then that will serve as a, quote, green flag, encouraging everyone to download the update. If a minority wants to rebel, they will simply not download the update. If a tightly coupled vote implements change X, then the change happens automatically, and if a minority wants to rebel, they can install a hard fork update that cancels the change. However, there clearly are non-zero transaction costs associated with making a hard fork, and this leads to some very important differences. One very simple and important difference is that tightly coupled voting sorry, I keep wanting to throw the word regulate in there. The difference is that tightly coupled voting creates a default in favor of the blockchain adopting what the majority wants, requiring minorities to exert great effort to coordinate a hard fork to preserve a blockchain's existing properties. Whereas loosely coupled voting is only a coordination tool and still requires users to actually download and run the software that implements any given fork. But there are also many other differences. Now let's get through some of the arguments against voting and dissect how each argument applies to voting as layer 1 and voting as layer 2. Low voter participation. One of the main criticisms of coin voting mechanisms so far is that no matter where they are tried, they tend to have very low voter participation. Yeah, that's because they find the coin that they want to mine and they fucking mine that coin. They don't want to make a whole bunch of decisions about, oh, let's change the fucking protocol. Blah. Continuing. They tend to have very low voter participation. The Dow Carbon vote only had a voter participation rate of 4.5%. Additionally, wealth distribution is very unequal, and the results of these two factors together are best described by this image created by a critic of the Dow fork. And yeah, whatever, we're not going to read all that. The EIP Carbon vote had 2.7 million ETH voting. The Dow proposal votes did not fare better, with participation never reaching 10%. And outside of Ethereum, things are not sunny either. Even in BitShares, a system where the core social contract is designed around voting, the top delegate in an approval vote only got 17% of the vote, and in Lisk, it got up to 30%. Though, as we will discuss later, these systems have other problems of their own. Low voter participation means two things. First, the vote has a harder time achieving the perception of legitimacy because it only reflects the view of a small percentage of people. Second, an attacker with only a small percentage of coins can sway the vote. These problems exist whether the vote is tightly coupled or loosely coupled. Game theoretic attacks. Aside from the big hack that received the bulk of the media attention, the Dow also had a number of much smaller game theoretic vulnerabilities. This article from Hacking Distributed does a good job of summarizing them. But this is only the tip of the iceberg. Even if all of the finer details of a voting mechanism are implemented correctly, voting mechanisms in general have a large flaw. In any one vote, the probability that any given voter will have an impact on the result is tiny. So the personal incentive that each voter has to vote correctly is almost insignificant. And if each person's size of the stake is small, their incentive to vote correctly is insignificant squared. Hence, a relatively small bribe spread out across the participants may suffice to sway their decision, perhaps possibly in a way that they collectively might quite disapprove of. Now you might say people are not evil, selfish profit maximizers that will accept a 50-cent bribe to vote to give $20 million to Josh Garza, I guess? Just because the above criticism says their individual chance of affecting anything is tiny. Rather, they would altruistically refuse to do something that evil. There are two responses to this criticism. First, there are ways to make a bribe that are quite plausible. For example, an exchange can offer interest rates for deposits, or even more ambiguously, use the exchange's own money to build a great interface and features, with the exchange operator using the large quantity of deposits to vote as they wish. Exchanges profit from the chaos, so their incentives are quite misaligned with users and coin holders. Second, and more damningly, in practice it seems like people, at least in their capacity as crypto token holders, are profit maximizers and seem to see nothing evil or selfish about taking a bribe or two. As Exhibit A, we can look at the situation with Lisk, where the delegate pool seems to have been successfully captured by two major, quote, political parties that explicitly bribe coin holders to vote for them, and also require each member in the pool to vote for all the others. Here's the Lisk Elite with 55 members, and out of a total of 101. And these are the member rules. Number 1, every member of Elite, except the China delegate, must share 25% of his/her forging Lisk to his/her voters every week. Number 2, every member of the Elite, except the China delegation, must donate 5% of forging Lisk to the Elite Lisk Fund used to support the Lisk ecosystem. Number 3, every member of Elite must vote for other members. 4, Elite membership registration is now closed, and so no new members are currently accepted. Voter rules. Number 1, for getting the rewards, you must vote for all of Elite group members. Number 2, Elite reward payouts will be done on a weekly basis and will be paid out to voter accounts automatically. All rights reserved by Elite group. And here is Lisk GDT with 33 members. And let's see the rules, GDT members. Let's see. Pool takes 10% for GDT Lisk development and returns 90% of rewards to voters. GDT members are excluded from payouts and return their rewards as a GDT reward for silver level and above. You best be gold, baby. And I'm not going to go through all the examples of bribery here, but anyway, continuing on. Here, note that there is a key difference between tightly coupled and loosely coupled votes. In a loosely coupled vote, direct or indirect vote bribing is also possible. But if the community agrees that some given proposal or set of votes constitutes a game theoretic attack, they can simply socially agree to ignore it. And in fact, this has kind of already happened. The carbon vote contains a blacklist of addresses corresponding to known exchange addresses, and votes from these addresses are not counted. In a tightly coupled vote, there is no way to create such a blacklist at protocol level, because agreeing who is part of the blacklist is itself a blockchain governance decision. But since the blacklist is part of a community-created voting tool that only indirectly influences protocol changes, voting tools that contain bad blacklists can simply be rejected by the community. It's worth noting that this section is not a predication that all tightly coupled voting systems will quickly succumb to bribe attacks. It's entirely possible that many will survive for one simple reason. All of these projects have founders or foundations with large pre-minds, and these act as large centralized actors that are interested in their platform's success, that are not vulnerable to bribes, and hold enough coins to outweigh most bribe attacks. However, this kind of centralized trust model, while arguably useful in some contexts in a project's early stages, is clearly one that is not sustainable in the long term. Yeah, because you got to spend coins to vote. Non-representatives. Another important objection to voting is that coin holders are only one class of user and may have interests that collide with those of other users. In the case of pure cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin, store of value, use hodling, and medium of exchange use, buying coffees, are naturally in conflict as the store of value prizes security much more than the medium of exchange use case. Not really. Which more strongly values usability. With Ethereum, the conflict is worse, as there are many people who use Ethereum for reasons that have nothing to do with Ether. See CryptoKitties. Or even value-bearing digital assets in general. See ENS. Additionally, even if coin holders are the only relevant class of user, One might imagine that this to be the case in a cryptocurrency where there is an established social contract that its purpose is to be the next digital gold and nothing else. There is still the challenge that a coin holder vote gives a much greater voice to wealthy coin holders than everyone else, opening the door for centralization of holdings to lead to an unencumbered centralization of decision making, or, in other words, total ether supply. I'm not going to go through the diagram. And if you want to see a review of a project that seems to combine all of these disadvantages at the same time, let's see here. This is memory coin, I guess. The criticism applies to both tightly coupled and loosely coupled voting equally. However, loosely coupled voting is more amenable to compromises that mitigate its unrepresentativeness, and we will discuss this more later. Centralization. Let's look at the existing live experiment that we have in tightly coupled voting on Ethereum, the gas limit. Here's the gas limit evolution over the past 2 years, and it shows a little diagram. You might notice that the general feel of the curve is a bit like another chart that may be quite familiar to you, and that's the top marginal income tax rate of 1913 to 2003. Basically, they both look like magic numbers that are created and repeated, renegotiated by a fairly centralized group of guys sitting together in a room. What's happening in the first case? Miners are generally following the direction favored by the community, which is itself gauged via social consensus aids similar to those that drive hard forks, core developer support, Reddit upvotes, etc. In Ethereum, the gas limit has never gotten controversial enough to require anything as serious as a coin vote. Hence, it is not all that clear that voting will be able to deliver results that are actually decentralized. If voters are not technically knowledgeable and simply defer to a single dominant tribe of experts, the criticism once again applies to tightly coupled and loosely coupled voting equally. Digital constitutions. One approach that has been suggested to mitigate the risk of runaway bad governance algorithms is, quote, digital constitutions that mathematically specify desired properties that the protocol should have and require any new code changes to come with a computer verifiable computer verifiable proof that they satisfy these properties. This seems like a good idea at first, but this should, in my opinion, be viewed skeptically. In general, the idea of having norms about protocol properties and having these norms serve the function of one of the coordination flags is a very good one. This allows us to enshrine core properties of a protocol that we consider to be very important and valuable and make them more difficult to change. However, this is exactly the sort of thing that should be enforced loosely. In loosely coupled, i.e. layer 2, rather than tightly coupled layer 1 form. Basically, any meaningful norm is quite hard to express in its entirety. This is part of the complexity of value problem. This is true even for something as seemingly unambiguous as the 21 million coin limit. Sure, one can add a line of code saying assert total _ supply is less than 21 million and or equals is less than or equal to 21 million, and put a comment around it saying do not remove at all costs. But there are plenty of roundabout ways of doing the same thing. For example, one could imagine a soft fork that adds a mandatory transaction fee. This is proportional to coin value times time since the coins were last sent. And this is equivalent to demurrage. My apologies, I can't pronounce that fucking word to save my life. Which is equivalent to deflation. One could also implement another currency called BJT coin with 21 million new units, and add a feature where if a Bitcoin transaction is sent, the miner can intercept it and claim the Bitcoin instead of giving the recipient BJT coin. This would rapidly force Bitcoins and BJT coins to be fungible with each other, increasing the total supply to 42 million without ever tripping up that line of code. Softer norms like not interfering with the application state are even harder to enforce. We want to be able to say that a protocol change that violates any of these guarantees should be viewed as illegitimate. There should be a coordination institution that waves a red flag, even if they get approved by a vote. Yeah, but that entity could then be bribed or gained or some other shit. I'm looking for something here really quick. No. There it is. Hold on one second. I'll be right back. Alright, so let's go ahead and start that one over. We want to be able to say that a protocol change that violates any of these guarantees should be viewed as illegitimate. There should be a coordination institution that waves a red flag even if they get approved by a vote. We also want to be able to say that a protocol change that follows the letter of a norm but blatantly violates its spirit, the protocol change should still be viewed as illegitimate. And having norms exist on layer 2 in the minds of humans in the community rather than in the code of the protocol best achieves that goal. I think that about Bitcoin and how you choose to use it. I said this to somebody earlier today that rather than requiring Bitcoin to change, it doesn't need to change. You can do your sidechain bullshit and all that other stuff without involving the rest of the network at all. But in doing so, you are the sole arbiter of the state of those transactions. So again, your users have to trust you not to fuck up. Continuing on. Toward a balance. However, I am also not willing to go the other way and say that coin voting or other explicit on-chain voting-like schemes have no place in governance whatsoever. The lead alternative seems to be core developer consensus. However, the failure mode of a system being controlled by, quote, ivory tower intellectuals who care more about abstract philosophies and solutions that sound technically impressive over and above real day-to-day concerns like user experience and transaction fees is, in my view, also a real threat to be taken seriously. I agree. So how do we solve this conundrum? Well, first, we can heed the words of Slate Star Codex in the context of traditional politics. Quote, "The rookie mistake is, you see that some system is partly Moloch, i.e. captured by misaligned special interests. So you say, okay, we'll fix that by putting it under the control of this other system. And we'll control this other system by writing, do not become Moloch on it in bright red marker. I see capitalism sometimes gets misaligned. Let's fix it by putting it under the control of government. We'll control the government by only having virtuous people in high offices." I'm not going to claim there is a great alternative, but the occasionally adequate alternative is the neoliberal one. Find a couple of elegant systems that optimize along different criteria approximately aligned with human happiness. Pit them off against each other in a structure of checks and balances. Hope they screw up in different places, like in that Swiss cheese model. Keep enough individual free choice around that, people can exit any system that gets too terrible and let cultural evolution do the rest. I agree. In blockchain governance, it seems like this is the only way forward as well. The approach for blockchain governance that I advocate for is, quote, multifactorial consensus, where different coordination flags and different mechanisms and groups are pulled, and the ultimate decision depends on the collective result of all of these mechanisms together. These coordination flags may include, number 1, the roadmap, i.e. a set of ideas and broadcasted earlier on the project's history about the direction of the project would be going in. Number 2, consensus among the dominant core development teams. Number 3, coin holder votes. Number 4, user votes through some kind of Sybil-resistant polling system. Number 5, established norms, ergo non-interference with applications. The 21 million coin limit there. I would argue that it is very useful for coin voting to be one of several coordination institutions deciding whether or not a given change gets implemented. It is an imperfect and unrepresentative signal, but it is a Sybil-resistant one. If you see 10 million Ethereum voting for a given proposal, you cannot dismiss that by simply saying, oh, that's just hired Russian trolls with fake social media accounts. It is also a signal that is significantly disjointed from the core development team that, if needed, it can serve as a check on it. However, as described above, there are very good reasons why it should not be the only coordination institution. And underpinning it all is the key difference from traditional systems that makes blockchains interesting. The layer 1 that underpins the whole system is the requirement for individual users to assent to any protocol changes and their freedom and credible threat to, quote, fork off if someone attempts to force changes on them that they consider hostile. Tightly coupled voting is also okay to have in some limited contexts. For example, despite its flaws, miners' ability to vote on the gas limit is a feature that has proven very beneficial on multiple occasions. The risk that miners will try to abuse their power may well be lower than the risk that any specific gas limit or block size limit hard-coded by the protocol on day 1 will end up leading to serious problems. And in that case, letting miners vote on the gas limit is a good thing. However, allowing miners or validators to vote on a few specific parameters that need to be rapidly changed from time to time is a very far cry from giving them arbitrary control over protocol rules or letting voting control validation. And these more expansive visions of on-chain governance have a much murkier potential, both in theory and practice. And a very good explanation there. A little deep dive into various voting and consensus mechanisms. And, I share a lot of his concerns here, but in my view, it's pretty simple. If you're doing the work, you should be the person voting on what code that you're using, or what implementation of the code that you're running on your machines. And in my mind, that should be the most dominant means of making a choice as to what protocols are being run or utilized, is the people that are running the fucking code, that are mining the blockchain, or mining the blocks, I mean, I don't see why a user needs to be able to vote on what kind of software I use. I don't see that as something that they should be in any kind of position to dictate to me. And so this whole thing on Bitcoin where where the devs have been talking about, this 85%, they're just useless because they're not upgrading. Fuck you. Who the fuck are you, man? I mean, really, I don't care if it bites Bitcoin in the ass. The fact of the matter is, people don't want to upgrade to your patch. There's a reason for it. I'm certain of that. It might be because you've abused their trust in the past. I mean, really, I'm sure Core never even thought about that while they were pushing things like segregated witness and trying to force all the transactions off chain and all this other bullshit. I'm sure they never really thought about, gosh, what if the miners don't want to make these upgrades? It's like, they will make these upgrades. They will run our software. We're the best developers on planet Earth. No, you're not. No, you're not. Because you're not really thinking about your constituents in the code that you're writing. You're thinking about some second-hand, third-hand motherfucker that wants in on this and is willing to throw enough money in your face. It's kind of obvious by now that that's the kind of people that are running your decisions. I mean, I hate putting it that way because I know a lot of you are participating out of a deep-seated personal desire to improve the system, and it bugs me that your trust is kind of abused in that way, you know. That you have people talking down to you saying, you will make this kind of code, or this is the code, this is the kind of thing that we want to develop, and this is what we're willing to, you know, reward you for participating in with our attention and, you know, our accolades. And what, you know what, dude, you got to really consider how important that stuff is. I mean, the network is telling you, 80-something% of the network is telling you, hey man, this is not the direction we want to go in. I don't care if it patches the software I'm running. I'm tired of you talking down to me and telling me what fucking software to run on my hardware. I'm going to run this old stuff because this is the version of Bitcoin I'm familiar with. This allows me to mine Bitcoin to my advantage or something. Whatever the reason may be, it's not for somebody else to dictate to them. And I really think that's the kind of thing that is going to be changing vastly in the not so distant future. I mean, there's people talking about bringing up another Bitcoin Foundation. Well, those of us who were around for the last one understand that is not a really good idea, because these people start interfacing with legislators and company representatives and whatnot, and before you know it, they're getting hired off, they're getting bribed, they're pushing for implementation changes on behalf of interested parties and not necessarily you. And there you have it. You know, they start making promises that they can't keep, and when the rest of the network tells these people in government and tells these people in companies, no, we're not going to implement your code, go fuck yourself, then it costs the rest of the community credibility because they can't deliver. So no, another foundation is not a good thing, and we should probably petition against it. It is with that in mind, I want to go ahead and throw down this song because I like to remind you all that you are elite. All of you are elite in this. Satoshi Nakamoto gave Bitcoin to everyone. He didn't give it to Bitcoin Core to fucking dictate to everybody else. They might have had access to the repository that it's on, but that's one repository that it's on. There's nothing to stop you from creating your own Bitcoin on your own repository or your own implementation of Bitcoin and broadcasting to the world. Hey man, this is some new code I put out there. This is a newer, better version of Bitcoin. Tell us how it works. We'll check it out. If it works the way you say it does and it works better than Bitcoin or more advantageously for all users, we'll probably use your implementation instead of Core's. There is nothing in the white paper that says we have to defer to Core. As a matter of fact, it entertains the possibility in it that the Core model, should it deviate from the desire of the community, that they have the right to fork. And we do, still. Anyway, let's go ahead and throw it down. Within the Ruins, Elite, here on Coin Metal. And that was Metallica with Hardwired to Self-Destruct. Yeah, I gotta say, I think they kind of hit it out of the park with that, the last release. Although, I don't know, I always hold them to Master of Puppets and Justice for All. And I mean, I know that they're not the same guys they were when they made that music. I understand that people change as they get older, having observed that in myself, of course. Anyway, but there is, I don't know, there seemed to be something a little more to the drive when they were younger. And I don't know if that's just because they were poor or just because they were younger. But with regard to the music itself, I don't know, it feels like, to me, they're not really exploring their abilities anymore. Not as much as they did, you know? It's like back when they were doing Master of Puppets and Justice for All, you know, I don't think they'd really hit their musical peak as far as capability is concerned. And I've seen this with a lot of other artists where they get into a certain mode of writing music or whatever, and they stop exploring as much. And I gotta say, for Metallica, this last album, it does feel like they explored a bit more than they had previously. Although, one thing that's always troubled me since Robert started playing with them as bassist is that I've never really felt like they've utilized him fully. You know, it's like they got the equivalent of fucking the Mexican Les Claypool there, and you know, they got him playing relatively straight bass lines, and I can't help but feel a little bit anxious about that. You know, that I feel like if they were to basically like take 5 minutes, okay, just each guy take 5 minutes, and you know, whatever you need, like a guitar line for Lars, a drum beat for James, or you know, any of the other guys, and just have them do 5 minutes to that and just explore it. You know, whether it's a straight, you know, 4/4 time or something like that. Just explore it with, you know, their style. Try and feel it as themselves, you know. And then, you know, and like have everybody else like gone, you know, so like no pressure, not even like telepathic pressure going on, you know, just one guy in the room, headphones, your instrument, right? And just fucking play to it. Whatever it is, you know, be it a drum track or a guitar line or something like that. You know, just a loop, you know, a 5-minute loop, you know, or 5 minutes of loops, right? That you're playing to, and just fucking go for it, man. And just try to explore that as far as you can within your capability, you know, and then bring it all back and see what elements fit, you know. And I think there are bands that kind of do that already. I'm not sure. I haven't been in a band since I was like 15 years old. So anyway, I think that would probably be really positive for them, especially going forward into a newer album. You know, I feel like there's like a disproportionate realm or like element of control going on there by one or more of the band members, where they're not really feeling it out as the four musicians that they really are, you know. But again, that's just my feeling. I've felt over the last couple albums, and actually since Master of Puppets, that it's been a kind of a degradation into like I don't know, trying to play to trends or something like that. And you know, to some extent, you can derive some sort of, I don't know, success, if you want to call it that, from that. But at the same time, I think to some extent it limits your return, you know? That when I listen to Master of Puppets, and I listen to that album to this day, because when I listen to other musicians out there and I compare it to what they did with that album, there's still not a whole lot that holds up to it. You know, compositional quality, the quality of the recording itself, the quality of the music, the intricacy of it, the way it all ties in. I don't know that there are very many bands out there that have really hit that unison. you know. And I know a lot of it was made possible by Cliff, you know. I understand that. And, you know, I think it's beyond expectation to expect them to try and adhere to that standard, because Cliff was a fucking awesome bassist. But here's the thing, so is Robert. Robert is a fucking awesome bassist. But when I listen to a lot of Metallica's stuff, I'm not hearing awesome bassist in there. I'm just hearing kind of good bassist, you know, competent bassist. But I'm not hearing Robert, you know. And I think that's kind of not good, you know. I mean, I think there's a Robert out there, and a James out there, and a Lars out there, and, you know, a Kirk out there, that when we take it all apart and we just bring it to their capabilities and how they like to play, you know, the modes that they like to play in, you know, so on and so forth, that there is a version of those people that creatively, and I'm not even talking about like fully blown out or anything like that, I mean just creatively, you know, working with what they have, could build a better album than Metallica has ever produced. I believe that. You know, and I think that a lot of the constraints that they felt by trying to adhere to what they previously did and what the expectations are of the fans, I think that's kind of taken away from what they're really capable of producing for us, you know? And I think that's one of those flaws of the music industry, that it's factored in such a way that it appeals to, you know, the big hooks, you know, get it now, get it, because there's somebody out there right now that's going to get it, right? Well, you know, you don't say that about Led Zeppelin albums. You know, the ones that the songs by Led Zeppelin that you really like, you don't say that. That's a fucking 40-year-old song. You don't give a fuck. Black Sabbath, same fucking thing. You don't give a fuck. It's fucking awesome music. Master of Puppets, one of the best albums ever fucking made. Do you give a fuck that it's 30-something years old? Hell no, you don't give a fuck. You go and you buy it anyway. Why? Because it is one of the best produced albums of all time. Period. Bar none. Persistence of Time by Anthrax, same fucking thing. Downward Spiral by Nine Inch Nails, same fucking thing. Did the people that made these albums at that time really give a fuck? I mean, was it as big a factor to them whether or not they sold a bazillion records? I would venture not. That was like a tertiary concern. That wasn't even a secondary concern. That was like, you know, third burner, maybe fourth burner. You know, it's like this vision that we're trying to make is so much more important than every other fucking concern, that we're going to dedicate our effort to that. And that's how those albums feel to me. You know, is that the work was central, you know, primary, and then everything else was secondary, tertiary, you know, some other fucking concern for somebody else to be had. This is my shit for right now. And this is all my shit for right now. This is my world for right now. And that's why those albums have sticking power. You know, it wasn't because they sold 10 million copies in 2 months. It's because the people that made them, that was their life for that period of time. You know, and I think that's probably another thing, is that it's one of those issues with success that, you know, so many people demand of your time, that actually dedicating that much time and effort to a composition is probably really fucking difficult. And so, you know, again, I'm not trying to make excuses for Metallica, but I mean, these are considerations that we as fans have to have in our minds. You know, it's that they are people. You know, they can only do so much, but they are musicians. And so I expect that, as that is their bread and butter, so to speak, that they should be focusing. I think musicians have the room to focus that much on a work. And I think the artists that do take the time and also make sure that they can play it, because playing it live is fucking key as far as I'm concerned. If you can't play it live, if you got to have like, you know, 20-30% of that music played by a recording or something like that, then it's not you. I mean, but that's my feeling, you know. Anyway, we're going to continue on with Mr. Buterin's examination of governance models. Because it is a preface, yet again, to the next thing we're going to read after this. And it does all tie together, I promise you. Anyway, so this is, again, it's on Vitalik.ca. Governance, Part 2. Plutocracy is still bad. And this was authored on March 28th, 2018. Coin holder voting, both for governance or of technical features and for more extensive use cases like deciding who runs validator nodes and who receives money from development bounty funds, is unfortunately continuing to be popular, and so it seems worthwhile for me to write another post explaining why I, and Vlad Zamfir and others, did not consider it wise for Ethereum, or really any base layer blockchain, to start adopting these kind of mechanisms in a tightly coupled form in any significant way. I wrote about the issues with tightly coupled voting in a blog post last year that focused on theoretical issues as well as focusing on some practical issues experienced by voting systems over the previous 2 years. Now, the latest scandal in DPoS land seems to be substantially worse. Because the delegate rewards in EOS are now so high, 5% of annual inflation, about $400 million per year, the competition on who gets to run nodes has essentially become yet another frontier of US-China geopolitical economic warfare. And that's why, not on my own, and that's not my own interpretation. A quote from this article, and that's original in Chinese. EOS supernode voting, multi-billion-dollar profits leading to crypto community inter-country warfare. Looking at community recognition, Chinese nodes feel much less represented in the community than US and Korea. The EOS.io official Twitter account was founded there. Has never been any interaction with the mainland Chinese EOS community. For a listing of the EOS officially promoted events and interactions with communities, see the picture below. And let's see here. I don't recognize a lot of it. With no support from the developer community, facing competition from Korea, the Chinese EOS supernodes have invented a new strategy: buy votes. The article then continues to describe further strategies, like forming alliances that all vote or buy votes from each other. Of course, it does not matter at all who the specific actors are that are buying votes or forming cartels. This time, it's some Chinese pools. Last time, it was, quote, members located in the USA, Russia, India, Germany, Canada, Italy, Portugal, and many other countries from around the globe. Next time, it could be totally anonymous or run out of a smartphone snuck into Trendon Shaver's prison cell. What matters is blockchains and cryptocurrency, originally founded in a vision of using technology to escape from the failures of human politics, have essentially all but replicated it. Crypto is a reflection of the world at large. The EOS New York community's response seems to be that they have issued a strongly worded letter to the world stating that buying votes will be against the Constitution. What other major political entity has made accepting bribes a violation of the Constitution? And how has that been going for them lately? The second part of this article will involve me, an armchair economist, hopefully convincing you, the reader, that yes, bribery is, in fact, bad. There are actually people who dispute this claim. The usual argument has something to do with market efficiency, as in, quote, isn't this good because it means that the nodes will win? The nodes that win will be the nodes that can be the cheapest, taking the least money for themselves and their expenses and giving the rest back to the community? The answer is kinda yes, but in a way that's centralizing and vulnerable to rent-sinking cartels and explicitly contradicts many of the explicit promises made by most DPoS proponents along the way. Let us create a toy economic model as follows. There are a number of people, all of which are running to be delegates. The delegate slot gives a reward of $100 per period, and candidates promise to share some portion of that as a bribe, equally split among all of their voters. The actual N delegates, ergo N equals 35, in any period are the N delegates that receive the most votes. That is, during every period, a threshold of votes emerges where if you get more votes than that threshold, you are a delegate. If you get less, you are not. And the threshold is set that N delegates are above the threshold. We expect that voters vote for the candidates that gives them the highest expected bribe. Suppose that all candidates start off by sharing 1%, that is, equally splitting $1 among all of their voters. Then, if some candidate becomes a delegate with K voters, each voter gets a payment of 1 over K. The candidate that is most profitable to vote for is a candidate that's expected to be in the top N, but is expected to earn the fewest votes within that set. Thus, we expect votes to be fairly evenly split among 35 delegates. Now, some candidates will want to secure their position by sharing more, by sharing 2%. You are likely to get twice as many votes as those that share 1%, as that's the equilibrium point where voting for you has the same payout as voting for anyone else. The extra guarantee of being elected that this gives is definitely worth losing an additional 1% of your revenue when you do get elected. We can't expect delegates to bid up their bribes and eventually share something close to 100% of their revenue. So the outcome seems to be that the delegate payouts are largely simply returned to voters, making the delegate payout mechanism close to meaningless. But it gets worse. At this point, there's an incentive for delegates to form alliances, aka political parties, aka cartels, to coordinate their share percentages. This reduces losses to the cartel from chaotic competition that accidentally leads to some delegates not getting enough votes. Once a cartel is in place, it can start bringing its share percentages down, as dislodging it is a hard coordination problem. If a cartel offers 80%, then a new entrant offers 90%, then to a voter seeking a share of that extra 10% is not worth the risk of either 1, voting for someone who gets insufficient votes and does not pay rewards, or 2, voting for someone who gets too many votes and so pays out a reward that's excessively diluted. Furthermore, even if cartel mechanics don't come into play, there is a further issue. The equilibrium of coin holders voting for whoever gives them the most bribes, or a cartel that has become an entrenched rent seeker, contradicts explicit promises made by DPoS proponents. Quoting, explain delegate proof of stake like I'm 5 years old. If a witness starts acting like an asshole or stops doing a quality job securing the network, people in the community can remove their votes, essentially firing the bad actor. Voting is always ongoing. From EOS, an introduction. By custom, we suggest that the bulk of the value be returned to the community for the common good. Software improvements, dispute resolution, and the like can be entertained. In the spirit of, quote, eating our own dog food, the design envisages that the community votes on a set of open entry contracts that act like, quote, foundations for the benefit of the community. Known as community benefit contracts, the mechanism highlights the importance of DPoS as enabling direct on-chain governance by the community. The flaw in all of this, of course, is that the average voter has only a very small chance of impacting which delegates get selected, and so they only have a very small incentive to vote based on any of these high-minded and lofty goals. Rather, their incentive is to vote for whomever offers the highest and most reliable bribe. Attacking is easy. If a cartel equilibrium does not form, then an attacker can simply offer a share percentage slightly higher than 100%, perhaps using fee sharing or some other kind of, quote, starter promotion as justification, capture the majority of delegate positions, and then start an attack. If they get removed from the delegate position via a hard fork, they can simply restart the attack again with a different identity. The above is not intended purely as a criticism of DPoS consensus or its use in any specific blockchain. Rather, the critique reaches much further. There has been a large number of projects recently that extol the virtues of extensive on-chain governance, where on-chain coin holder voting can be used not just to vote on protocol features, but also to control a bounty fund. Quoting a blog post from last year, quote, "Anyone can submit a change to the governance structure in the form of a code update. An on-chain vote occurs, and if passed, the update makes its way onto the test network. After a period of time on the test network, a confirmation vote occurs, at which point the change goes live on the main network. They call this concept a, quote, self-amending ledger. Such a system is interesting because it shifts power towards users and away from the more centralized group of developers and miners. On the developer side, anyone can submit a change, and, most importantly, everyone has an economic incentive to do it. Contributions are rewarded by the community with newly minted tokens through inflation funding. This shifts from the current Bitcoin and Ethereum dynamics, where a new developer has little incentive to evolve the protocol. Thus, power tends to concentrate among the existing developers, to one where everyone has equal earning power. In practice, of course, what this can easily lead to is funds that offer kickbacks to users who vote for them, leading to the exact scenario that we saw above with DPoS delegates. In the better case, the funds will simply be returned to the voters, giving coin holders an interesting rate, and cancels out the inflation. And in the worst case, the portion of the inflation will get captured as economic rent by the cartel, or by a cartel. Note also that the above is not a criticism of all on-chain voting. It does not rule out systems like Futurkey. However, Futurkey is untested, but coin voting is tested, and so far it seems to lead to a high risk of economic or political failure of some kind. Far too high a risk for a platform that seeks to be an economic base layer for development of decentralized applications and institutions. So what's the alternative? The answer is, we've been saying all along, cryptoeconomics. Cryptoeconomics is fundamentally about the use of economic incentives together with cryptography to design and secure different kinds of systems and applications, including consensus protocols. The goal is simple: to be able to measure the security of a system, that is, the cost of breaking the system or causing it to violate certain guarantees, in dollars. Traditionally, the security of systems often depends on social trust assumptions. The system works if two of three of Alice, Bob, and Charlie are honest, and we trust Alice, Bob, and Charlie, to be honest, because I know Alice, and she's a nice girl. Bob registered with FinCEN and has a money transmitter license, and Charlie has run a successful business for 3 years and wears a suit. Social trust assumptions can work well in many contexts, but they are difficult to universalize. What is trusted in one country or one company or one political tribe may not be trusted in others. They are also difficult to quantify. How much money does it take to manipulate social media to favor some particular delegate in a vote? Social trust assumptions seem secure and controllable in the sense that, quote, people are in charge. But in reality, they can be manipulated by economic incentives in all sorts of ways. Cryptoeconomics is about trying to reduce social trust assumptions by creating systems where we introduce explicit economic incentives for good behavior and economic penalties for bad behavior, and making mathematical proofs of the form, quote, in order to generate X to be guarantee X to be violated, at least these people need to misbehave in this way, which means the minimum amount of penalties or foregone revenue that the participants suffer is Y. Casper is designed to accomplish precisely this objective in the context of proof-of-stake consensus. Yes, this does mean that you can't create a, quote, blockchain by concentrating the consensus validation into 20 uber-powerful supernodes, and you have to actually think to make a design that intellectually breaks through and navigates existing trade-offs and achieves massive scalability in a still decentralized network. But the reward is you don't get a network that's constantly liable to breaking in half or becoming economically captured by unpredictable political forces. Number 1. It has been brought to my attention that EOS may be reducing its delegate rewards from 5% per year to 1%. Needless to say, this doesn't really change the fundamental validity of any of the arguments. The only result of this would be five times less rent extraction potential at the cost of a 5 times reduction to the cost of attacking the system. 2. Some have asked, but how can it be wrong for DPoS delegates to bribe voters when it is perfectly legitimate for mining and stake pools to give 99% of their revenues back to their participants? The answer should be clear. In POW and proof of work and proof of stake, it's the protocol's role to determine the rewards that miners and validators get based on the miners and the validators' observed performance, and the fact that the miners and validators that are pools pass along the rewards and penalties to their participants gives the participants an incentive to participate in good pools. In DPoS, the reward is constant, and it's the voters' role to vote for pools that have good performance. But with the key flaw that there is no mechanism to actually encourage voters to vote in that way, instead of just voting for whoever gives them the most money, without actually encouraging voters to vote in a way, without taking performance into account. Penalties in DPoS do not exist, and are certainly not passed on to voters. So, voters have no, quote, skin in the game. Penalties in Casper pools, on the other hand, do get passed on to participants. Yeah, so it's got to cost you something if you fuck up. You know, I think this is one of those points that a lot of people try to defer the cost of bad behavior. And it's not something that's going to work out in the long term, because, not at least with proof of work and proof of stake systems, because in the long run, it means that the bad behavior is going to cause inefficiencies and fuck-ups elsewhere in the network. because you're willing to tolerate them to some extent, because the reward is exceeding the penalty for bad behavior, right? But that's not something that's going to continue forever. And one of the limitations that we can foresee in the future of Bitcoin is the reward halvening. Just because it's something you can afford to do now, it's not going to be something you're going to be able to afford to do in another 2 years unless the price of Bitcoin goes way up, or B, the number of transactions per block goes up. And as the main development team seems to be against B, the likelihood of it happening is that much lower. So the likelihood that you're going to be able to afford to abuse the network by overpaying at this point, again, that window is additionally limited. Let me just say that. And so what we've been working up to this entire fucking episode, here we go. This is on CoinDesk, and it's by Bradley Dale, and this was authored on October 4th, 2018. So apparently Brady is in the future, and his icon here is that of a person in a tie. So I'm going to assume that even though it doesn't show the face of the person, I'm going to go by the name and the icon and say yes, penis. This is authored at 3:01 UTC. So here we go. EOS investors can't say they weren't warned. What was foretold in a March blog post by Ethereum creator Vitalik Buterin may have come to pass on the world's 5th largest blockchain, with a bout of vote-buying drama rocking the $5 billion protocol over the weekend. That's when a Twitter account named Maple Leaf Capital produced screenshots from a leaked Excel spreadsheet that supposedly shows the China-based exchange Huobi, one of the world's oldest and largest, accepting money for its support of certain entities in the charge of ensuring the network's distributed decision-making. The allegation is notable as EOS only has 21, quote, block producers, trusted entities, periodically elected to maintain the history of the blockchain and that receive monetary rewards in the form of cryptocurrency for doing so. No one can verify any of the claims made in this thread, nor the provenance of the spreadsheet's data. Huobi promptly denied all the accusations. However, that doesn't mean damage control isn't being done. Block 1, the creators and maintainers of EOS.io software, for which they raised $4 billion in a nearly year-long initial coin offering, issued its own statement on Tuesday. It reads, quote, "We are aware of some unverified claims regarding irregular block producer voting and the subsequent denials of those claims. We believe it is important to ensure a free and democratic election process within EOS and may, as we deem appropriate, vote with other holders to reinforce the integrity of the process." Accusations of wrongdoing aside, the controversy illuminates deeper issues, adding fuel to the fire for those who allege that EOS protocol may have an incomplete approach to governance, meaning that part of the decision-making is entirely arbitrarily dictated by the developers or some other group. Continuing on. At the simplest level, the debate is over whether or not block producers should or shouldn't be allowed to pay other people to vote for them. The EOS interim constitutions, documents designed to put forth rules for participants on the network, clearly ban vote buying, but that constitution has never been ratified by EOS users. Yet at the same time, EOS seems designed for block producers to support other block producers. Block producers earn tokens and have an interest in the long-term health of the protocol. So, some argue it seems natural that they would and must use those tokens to support other block producers they have collaborated with and believed to be good stewards of the network. Kevin Rose, community manager of EOS New York, a block producer since the launch, acknowledged the point, but told CoinDesk, quote, "Profit sharing and profit trading which compromise an organization's ability to remain independent is the issue." Huobi did not immediately respond to a request for comment. Block 1 declined to provide additional comment. Unfinished governance. Despite the lack of conclusions, however, the incident has highlighted claims that the state of the EOS software was perhaps too primitive at launch, so it's worth revisiting these claims, which have now renewed. First, EOS has on-chain governance, albeit a system in which only one decision can be made by the EOS token holders. They can decide which companies have those 21 block producer seats that control EOS's ledger. Every other decision is up to those 21 block producers. They can even, as we previously reported, lock up accounts they believe to be operating maliciously. Second, EOS has a constitution that forbids buying votes, but it's never been ratified. It isn't even clear what ratification means in that the software was released without a way to agree on rules. This point is relevant to a recent Medium post by Ethereum developer Vlad Zamfir, in which he discusses the need for a governance scheme to attain legitimacy, that is, to have the consent of the governed. In the case of EOS, whether that goal is satisfied remains uncleared. The interim constitution was put together by a committee of block producer hopefuls leading up to the EOS launch. Its last article acknowledges that it is an interim constitution until a new one can be ratified, but as we previously reported, not only has ratification not proceeded, there isn't even a legitimized way to ratify it. Since launch, new block producer hopefuls have entered the space who don't know about or don't care about the process that yielded the interim constitution, and some of them have managed to win one of those top spots. Third, EOS governance, as written, does not work well with exchanges, which have custody over a vast amount of user cryptocurrency. EOS governance is done through the wallet. If users don't turn custody of their tokens over to exchanges, there's really no way for them to vote their tokens. Perhaps more importantly, there's no way to prevent exchanges from voting the tokens of their users who don't care to vote. Voting works at the wallet level, so a person can only really vote if they have custody. Anyone who wants to express their opinion about who should be a block producer has to stake their tokens on EOS, which locks them up for at least 3 days. Each wallet can vote for 1 to 30 block producers. However many they choose, each gets a vote for every token the user staked. So, if a user has 10 staked tokens and they vote for 10 block producers, each one gets 10 votes. If they vote for 30, then all 30 get 10 votes. There's no additional nuance. Voting is also continuous. EOS.io software rechecks the vote counts every few minutes, and if a new candidate has been pulled into the top 21, one gets kicked out and that new one goes in. Since users can put their tokens into an exchange's wallet or wallets to use them there, the exchange would have to go through great lengths to give their EOS holders a way to vote, such as creating a separate wallet for each permutation of votes. Bitfinex has written open source software to enfranchise its users, but it has limitations. We don't know of any other cryptocurrency exchanges that have implemented it or anything similar. The active EOS community has urged users since before the launch to take their tokens off of exchanges, a point made by one user in a group video conference call of Chinese block producer candidates hosted by EOS Alliance, and organized around the current controversy. Lastly, EOS wallets are anonymous by default. This makes it impossible to know who is giving what to whom. It's not as if the various block producers accused of paying Huobi would have to pay a portion of their block rewards to known Huobi wallet after all. Even so, if Huobi hasn't accepted such payments, the present conversation reflects widely shared fears that something like this could happen. Vitalik's prediction. Still, some allege that those backing EOS protocol have known about this issue, but have been slow to satisfy concerns. Buterin, as an example, articulated the vulnerability to vote buying before EOS launched. He wrote, quote, "The average voter has only a very small chance of impacting which delegates get selected. Their incentive is to vote for whoever offers the highest and most reliable bribe." At the time, he also observed that the tension around deciding who gets to be a block producer, quote, has essentially become yet another frontier of U.S.-China geopolitical economic warfare. This remains true. Scanning various EOS-affiliated Telegram channels, we saw EOS holders announcing that they'd no longer vote for any Chinese-based block producers at all, though it might be more accurate to say that the fault line is a tension between block producers who participated in the public launch and those who didn't. But it does reflect a deeper problem spurred by Block 1's failure to define rules at the outset. Some users have been treating the interim constitution like so much digital paper. Besides the interim constitution, there's also a block producers agreement, in which block producer candidates commit to have websites and disclose anyone who owns more than 10% of their company. Some have not done so, and there's little the community can do besides fork the protocol. As Zamfir wrote on his blog, quote, "If a coordination mechanism is legitimate, people will justifiably act like it's a fact that people will use it. If it's illegitimate, then they will act like it's a fact that people won't use it." Some people with clout on the network aren't acting like the interim constitution and block producer agreement are legitimate. We already know that because they don't all do things that the agreement requires them to do. So even if Huobi isn't buying votes now, eventually someone almost certainly will, unless rules are put in place that the whole community agrees as legitimate, the whole community views as legitimate. In other words, it's a problem that may just take time to sort out. That was the take of a block producer calling itself Aurora EOS, which wrote on its blog, "As EOS grows and supports more use cases, those invested in the long-term success of the network will combat the forces like vote manipulation that degrade the long-term security of the network. That is, if a decentralized community like EOS has already become fragmented, the built-in incentive for the network to succeed should promote solutions." As Zamfir's post points out, it won't be enough for it to vote something through. It has to be viewed by enough participants as legitimate, such that the lion's share of participants feel inclined to follow the rules. In the short term, if any block producers are using their cloak avariciously, Block 1 can crush them out of the top 21 with its giant pool of still on the sidelines tokens. But one whale shoving aside others may not hold up as legitimate governance strategy over time either. Yeah, because eventually you run out of tokens. So there you have it. The danger exhibiting its head. And it's funny because even existence of this danger and examples of the possibility of it being executed probably isn't enough to dissuade people from participating or wanting to manipulate the vote. Anyway, let's go ahead and throw back down into some music. And I haven't been playing any Meshuggah tonight, and that's just a shame. And so, let's see. Qualms of Reality. Old school Meshuggah here on Coin Metal. And that was Lamb of God with Erase This. And it is with that I'd like to close out this episode. Thank you very, very much for listening. I certainly do appreciate the support. We will be back again on Friday at 8 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. And so until then, I'd like y'all to trade safe. Do your homework. And watch out for your own bunghole, because no DPoS structure that you decide on will ever be able to do it better for you. Thank you very much for listening again. I certainly do appreciate the support. You guys have an excellent evening. And as far as our last dance, I know I played it last time, but this is a nice, short and sweet one. Here it is. Killing Joke, Asteroid, Last Dance here on Coin Metal. Thank you again for listening, and you all have an excellent evening.